So make another
You don't like that one?
some professional strategy. Occupied background.
No, I don't like that one.
Make your move from your
Uh, so waiting room 10, I will admit all of them. And so basically, culture can make a firm become more efficient because it's a more flexible method of control. So if you have a lot of employees who are highly committed to the company, if you have a strong culture that is positive, as opposed to negative in culture, negative cultures would be counter to the aims of the corporation. Employees have adopted values that are in opposition to what the organization is trying to achieve. Then from the organization standpoint, the culture might become negative or toxic. This isn't a theory. I mean, companies like General Motors, the Detroit car companies in general, had negative labor relations, negative union relations beginning in the 1930s. And that continued for 35, 40 years into the 1970s, at which point the Japanese, who had much better managed their labor relations as well as their HR, and this is what the book Theory Z is about, um, overtook the Detroit companies in terms of quality and competitiveness. And now Toyota, I believe Toyota is currently the largest, let me just check that, the largest automobile company in terms of sales. Um, so Toyota, yeah, Toyota is the top, still the top company. However, they're beginning to face competition from the Chinese, and we'll see where that goes. So I'm looking at the top car companies, and only one at this point is Japanese. That just to read them off: Toyota, Volkswagen, Stellantis, um, uh, Stellantis, Ford, Mercedes, GM, BMW, Hyundai, Honda, and Nissan. So Honda and Nissan are 9 and 10. Uh, but basically in the 70s, the Japanese companies were posing a much bigger threat, and a lot of the reason was the better HR. At this point, I was telling my 3200 class that investing in artificial intelligence and robotics at this point might be a good idea. I mean, I don't know the future, I'm not saying tomorrow it's going to shoot up or anything, but in the long run, it seems to me that this kind of technology is going to be increasingly popular. And a lot of the rote work that's currently done by low paid labor will be replaced. So HR may become less of an issue in many contexts. I'm not saying it's ever going to be unimportant, but it may not be the strategic element that it was in the 80s. It'll always be important though, and it'll always be something that top management has trouble with. And I'll talk about that in a little while. So I also said last time that ethical culture is where the employees and management share ideas of right and wrong. And leaders should lead by example so that they create a culture that's ethical. Those are all important points. I also said that managers can create more ethical cultures by adhering to certain principles, and these include communicating ethical expectations, providing ethical training, rewarding ethical acts and punishing unethical acts, providing protective mechanisms. And your book points out that the values of top managers are a good predictor of how the lower ranking people will behave. So if you have a management that provides a good example and uh, integrates ethical thinking into their competitive strategy and profit maximization, then the employees will do so too. And you won't have situations such as we've witnessed with the Supreme Court justices taking money from rich people, or Hunter Biden accepting large investments from governments that we negotiate with, and other kinds of corrupt practices that pretty much permeate Washington. So basically, one question is, I think this is new material. I think I didn't get to this last time, that you can view organic organizations as being less dependent on organizational structure, hierarchy, chain of command, and they use cross-hierarchical and cross-functional teams with low formalization. They have a comprehensive, maybe in all channels, if you will, communication network, and they rely on participative decision making. And such cultures that that are organic, that are flexible, that de-emphasize hierarchy, that are innovative, tend to be more innovative than formal cultures that in places like Johnson and Johnson that emphasize chain of command. J&J is what the two strategy theorists, Miles and Snow, had a typology. I might have mentioned this already. And one of them is like, I always forget the terms. One of them is like the explorer or the experimenter that enters into new products. Another one is a defender that defends their existing products. Another one is a firm that lacks, that's just going to react, a reactor that lacks a real strategy and just reacts to what the other firms. But the type that tends to be the most successful is what they call the analyzer. And the analyzer is the type of firm that looks at what other firms do and then copies what they do and improves on it. Microsoft would be another example of that. J&J does that a lot. So I think innovative cultures are more organic, but they're not necessarily the most successful. Just because you're innovative doesn't guarantee success. Although some examples, Apple would be one that is successful, but that's not always the case. So basically, in innovative cultures, there's a number of organizational structure and HR considerations. For example, if a company uses contingent rewards and pays bonuses for good performance, that will tend to influence innovation. The idea that motivation isn't affected by incentives, the Alfie Kohn I was talking about, and Deci and other scholars have argued that rewards demotivate, and I think that's false. And this is an example that if you use incentives, you tend to get more innovation. slack resources, if there's not a lot of anxiety about getting the base work done, there will be more innovation. I may have mentioned the case of Jackson Pollock, the famous painter who was taken under the wing of Peggy Guggenheim, the rich heiress, and she paid for him. I think they had an affair, among other things, but she paid for his expenses. He went out to the country at that time, Southampton. I was there last year. Southampton is hardly the country now. It's very built up and suburban, but back in that day, 60 years ago, it was rural. And he went out there and experimented with his art and had a lot of free time. He didn't face tight resources. And the point is that you need that luxury of time to commit to creativity if you're going to be creative. Strong national culture norms retard innovation. And the reason for that is fairly obvious. If you have a tradition-based society, if you have very strong culture, and really a corporate culture is a set of historical norms that have been adopted over time. And if those norms don't emphasize flexibility or innovation, which has been the case in the United States, then you're not going to be a country that has a great deal of innovation. So, like in the case of like Sweden, which a lot of students like to talk about, somehow think is an idealistic society. They're not overly innovative. I mean, they've had some innovation there, and at the high end in design and stuff, they're creative. I think Spotify, the guy that founded Spotify, I forget his name, is there. And they do have some creativity, but overall, they're not known for their creativity. And part of that is the highly taxed and regulated economy. And part of it's that they have a very strong national culture, which I think facilitates the high taxes. There's less corruption there because of their strong culture, but the outcome is that they're not all that innovative. And in the case where some of them are innovative, like the guy who founded IKEA. IKEA is a Swedish firm. It's a very creative idea. His name was Ingvar Kamprad. He actually exited Sweden. He lived for a long time in Switzerland, I believe, which is actually a freer economy than the United States. And he left because he objected to the taxes in Sweden. And the same occurred with one of the great all-time movie directors, Ingmar Bergman. If you haven't seen any of his movies, I highly recommend them. They're usually with subtitles. The Seventh Seal, and I saw a whole bunch of them over the years with Liv Ullmann was often the star. Persona, Wild Strawberries, a great movie. Cries and Whispers. Some of them are very depressing. He's very moody. In The Seventh Seal, the guy plays chess with death to outsmart death, and always very creative and magnificently appointed movies. He left Sweden because he couldn't deal with the tax system there in the 60s. They've reduced it since, but it's still very steep. All right, so moving into change management. Change can be defined as when things become different. We all hate change. There was this silly little book years ago in the early 2000s, Who Moved My Cheese, which was one of the more ridiculous chapters in management history. The executives were giving thousands of copies of this about a mouse who's can't find his cheese and gets all distraught because he can't deal with the change. And it makes a fairly simple-minded point of in a simple-minded way, but the idea is that change agents are people who act as catalysts, and that if companies want to change, they have to support these kinds of people. That's rarely the case. I've talked about this a few times, that when William Lee invented the stocking frame in 1589 was probably the beginning. Who knows what preceded it? It's not recorded, but it's the first major recorded invention that saved a great deal of effort and cost in the British textile industry. But when he invented it, he was hounded by the public, and Queen Elizabeth wanted to arrest him and drove him out of England because of fear of technology. And this was related to the rise of the Luddites later on, and many other anti-change movements. And so basically, change is always threatening to people, and they dislike it. They have anxiety, habits, the need for security, fear of what job loss will mean, fear of the unknown, threats to old-fashioned expertise. Imagine how carriage makers felt when the automobile was invented, or printers when they realized that personal computers could do what they do at almost zero cost. And they all lost their jobs. It's true. I mean, people do suffer because of change, but what happens is the public becomes wealthier because there are fewer costs, and then that money is directed into new areas that no one thought of, and people fill those demands. So basically, it's also true, and I already alluded to this with the case of William Lee, that Queen Elizabeth wanted to arrest him, that innovation threatens the power structure at times, and this is why dictatorships try to control change and manage it. All right, so let's say you're a company and you need to change. You've heard about ChatGPT, you want it integrated into your operations. Kurt Lewin's was a long time ago, a famous psychologist who argued that there's the way to manage change is a three-step model. You, number one, unfreeze the status quo. Number two, change things to a desired end state. And number three, refreeze the new change. Some ways that your book talks about to overcome resistance to change on pages 542 to 3 include communication, participation, having employees participate, communicating the change, building support and commitment, encouraging people to adopt the change. And we saw this in and the lack of this in Moneyball, which you did your discussion board on about a week and a half ago. And basically, the manager, Philip Seymour Hoffman, was Art something or other, I forget his name in real life, in the movie, tries to sabotage the thing. The scouts try to sabotage the thing. Everybody who's in the system hates the change. And the same thing in 12 O'Clock High, you see it there too, that he needs to instill systematic discipline so that they'll fly as a unit. It was the angles of the guns had to be so directed that the unit as a whole would be protected. And to do that required a great deal of discipline, much like orchestrating a ballet. You know, and if you know, you saw that miniseries Flesh and Bone, or you know something about ballet, you know that the leaders of those are really strict. They have to be really hard asses, excuse me, for leading that kind of group in order to get the exact precision. You know, and I've been to a few ballets in the last year or two, and the amazing precision that these artists achieve is almost unworldly and beautiful. And basically, this has to be done many times. It has to be done in sports. It has to be done in the military, and it has to be done also in many manufacturing processes that require a huge degree of coordination and spontaneity. I mean, about 20 years ago, people hated Walmart. You don't hear it as much now because so much has changed, and Walmart's almost a relic. And of course, they're still very successful, but I don't mean to say that. But you know, everyone's thinking about online and new things like that. And so basically, one of the ways that Walmart became dominant was by creating the idea of cross-docking, which is that the orders, there are no supervisors. There are supervisors, that's incorrect. There are supervisors, but the supervisors don't get involved in ordering. They used to. But instead, when somebody buys a product, the barcode goes into the computer. That goes not just, at first they were doing it to their warehouse, but the information flows right to the manufacturer, and they help the manufacturer set this up. And when there are sufficient sales, the manufacturer ships directly. They must arrive at the warehouse at a precise minute. It's down to the minute. And if they are late, Walmart doesn't pay them the full amount. And so they have to arrive there on the dot, not before, not after. And basically, the product is moved at the same time from the supplier truck to the Walmart truck. This is like a ballet. It is orchestrated to the minute. And what that does is it reduces costs. Basically, Walmart eliminated its storage costs. And this idea is related to lean manufacturing. And to change from a traditional system that existed in the 1970s, say, to today's system required huge change. And in order to make such change, companies have to overcome all this sort of resistance, this commitment to the status quo, commitment to the organization. And so you have to change the way people think. You have to build support. You have to develop a positive climate. You have to develop trust. You have to select people whose personalities are accepting of change. So in other words, one way to help create a flexible environment is to hire employees who thrive on change and not who are resistant to change. And I think, you know, when you think about skills that you can adopt, one of them, and maybe an important one, is your attitude towards change. That, in other words, that there are certain personality traits associated with being open to change. One of these, the big five, openness is one of them. But I would add to that tolerance of ambiguity is a trait that some people are more tolerant, and that, by the way, could include openness. It's measured by a different instrument, but the concept is virtually overlapping. So in other words, a lot of people are threatened by a new idea. Other people are fascinated by new ideas. A lot of people are threatened by a new innovation. Other people thrive on new innovation. And so, you know, developing that taste, I think it's something you can develop. Creating a love of change is probably going to stand you in good stead, because we're moving into a world where change will become accelerated, where you're going to see more and more frequent change. And I think we're just beginning with this artificial intelligence stuff. You know, the politicians are already, and there's reason to be scared of it. I think Elon Musk has said that it could be our greatest threat or our greatest downfall, and or something along those lines. And I think that's true. I think there's real threats to artificial intelligence, and it needs to be done carefully. But if it's done correctly and not interfered with, when I say done carefully, I mean not abused and used for propaganda or for manipulation of the public or things like that. And if it's done, and by the way, I don't think television and the internet and Google were done properly. So, I mean, AI poses maybe worse threats than those, but given the track record that we've had with other new innovation, they've all been abused, starting with the radio. I might have told you already the story of Orson Welles's War of the Worlds. He did a rendition of H.G. Wells's famous science fiction novel written in the early 20th century, I think. And you know, basically he broadcast it as though Martians were actually landing, and people actually believed it. That's when I think the government, I mean, they had already had a lot of experience with propaganda during World War I, and that's where propaganda really became a widespread mechanism around the world. But I think War of the Worlds kind of took it to a new level. It kind of said, well, you know, you can reach millions of people through these mass media, and just lie to them, and everyone's going to believe it. And I think we're living with that now. And excuse me if I offended anybody. So basically, I mentioned Lewin's three-step model, where you unfreeze the status quo, move to a desired end state, and refreeze a new change, is a simple one and very commonsensical, but maybe a little too simple. So basically, you can increase the forces that direct behavior away from the status quo. You can create incentives. You can also minimize the restraining forces. So Lewin used a similar model with stress. I think he liked this kind of model. Sorry, I have a bunch of people here I haven't admitted. He kind of liked this kind of model, and I'll put it on the screen. So you have like this, let's say this is the status quo, and you have forces for change. And
Professor,
against
I think some people is waiting in the waiting room.
forces against change, and they're in conflict with each other. So they're fighting each other. And the idea is that you push this squiggly line in this direction by enhancing the forces for change and minimizing the forces against change. Okay, so basically, all right. So basically, Lewin's model is fairly straightforward, but maybe a little too simple. One alternative approach is Cotter's 8-step plan. Cotter argued that you first create a sense of urgency, you form a coalition with enough power to lead the change, you create a new vision to direct the change, you communicate the vision throughout the organization, you empower others to act on the vision, you plan for, create, and reward short-term wins, you consolidate improvements, reassess changes, and make necessary adjustments, and you reinforce the changes by demonstrating the relationship between new behaviors and organizational success. Another approach is action research, which follows the science, and I'm talking about change management approaches. And by the way, all of this stuff could be put under the rubric, under the category of organizational development, which is a collection of planned change interventions based on humanistic democratic values that seek to improve organizational effectiveness. And organizational development is in use in many companies. It focuses on the subjective ways people see and make sense of their work environment. The OD practitioner consults with the client to understand process events with which they must deal, and identifies processes that can use improvement to become more effective. Common topics that are covered in organizational development are workflow, informal relationships, informal communication channels. The idea of intergroup development is that the OD consultant seeks to change groups' attitudes, stereotypes, and perceptions of each other so that the groups get along better. Each group, let's say there are two groups in conflict, each group meets independently, lists its perceptions and how it believes the other group perceives it, and then they go back. You could use a similar thing in international relations. If there are two countries in conflict, you could use similar processes. The thing is, people have to be motivated to resolve the conflict, and often conflicts are rooted in history and culture and are difficult to resolve. The idea, getting back to the idea of action research, you in action research, you diagnose the problem, you analyze it, you develop feedback, you take action, and then you evaluate. So people who participate in the program help identify the problem and help identify the solution. So feedback requires that you share with employees what has been found from the diagnosis and analysis. So the OD practitioner talks to people, attempts to diagnose the problem, analyzes the diagnosis, gives feedback to the employees, then has the management make the necessary changes, and then evaluates the effects of the change as to whether it's effective. You could view a lot of HR in this light as well. I mean, HR could be viewed, especially things like training, as an example of organizational development. Training, wellness programs, certain benefit plans, incentives, these could all be viewed as applications of organizational development. We're going to talk about HR next. Another technique is called appreciative inquiry, and that's one that seeks to identify unique qualities and strengths in a company and then builds on them to improve performance. It accentuates the positive, it identifies unique qualities and special strengths. Steps to appreciative inquiry include discovery, dreaming, coming up with creative ideas, design, and finding the company's destiny. Some of this is a little dramatic, maybe overly dramatic. All right, the change paradox is that there is no final optimal state for an organization. Holistic thinking and balancing paradoxical elements are effective. So you can see this in particular. I think the paradigm for this idea of the change paradox, that there's no end state, is the idea of continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is an idea created by try to clear the screen, is an idea created by Deming, but I may have mentioned already, W. Edwards Deming. And he wrote a book, Out of the Crisis, in the 1980s about quality. Okay, now, sadly, I think he was the one that basically created the Japanese quality revolution. And the reason cars run 300,000 miles now instead of 100,000 is the quality revolution, along with other innovations like lean manufacturing, which I kind of just described with the case of Walmart and cross-docking. And basically, this idea of quality has unfortunately not gained the currency that I thought it would in 1988 or so when I first heard about it. Deming at that time was teaching, he had taught at Columbia as an adjunct for a while, and he was teaching at NYU as an adjunct. And he had been to Japan and had already, the quality prize in Japan is named after Deming, and a lot of Japanese companies compete for it. But what happened, I thought that there would be a similar quality revolution in America in response to the Japanese, but they had something, the top managements and whoever else makes these decisions had something else in mind, and that is a focus on flexible organization. And this idea, I think, took off rather than quality because of the technological change that was occurring in this period. So in other words, managements realized that if you have cellular phones and you have computers and things like that, that you don't have to be at the office. You don't need as strong an organization. You can flatten the organization. You can outsource the organization. You can reformulate the organization so that it's more interactive and you don't need as much management. And so this technological change led to flexibility. But what that ignored was that the long-term processes that the Japanese had innovated in their quality systems produced merchandise of higher quality than you get from this outsourcing approach. So you would say, well, why not just combine the TQM with the outsourcing? And I think you can do that, but it's hard. And so the managements that were engaging in the outsourcing lacked the ability to implement TQM processes. So the results are that I think much of the tech we buy now is of not good quality. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. I think that's objectively the case. You use voice recognition, it works maybe a third of the time. You use an Apple laptop and the pad freezes when you're trying to do something, and on and on. And so basically, the quality was in part sacrificed, but what we got instead was new products and more flexibility. And ultimately, I think, what we're doing now, like people working at home and stuff like that. So basically, if you look at Deming's idea of TQM, total quality management, what you have is, I'm going to clear the screen. what you have is that you've got a production process, and it's trying to produce, let's say this is the process, and the end result should be a size 6 shoe. I got to change this. The end result is a size 6 shoe. Okay, so you you look at the outputs along the process. I'm having trouble with this. Okay, so you look at the outputs along the process. It's not a good way to do it, but I'll play with this. So you want them to be within a certain limit of the target line, the size 6 shoe. And over time, you set up, let's say this is a 1/50th of an inch difference. Okay, and over time, on the whole, they're within the limit. So they're good, but there's a couple that aren't. What TQM says is that if you get one of these outliers, the workers should investigate the cause. And if once they identify the cause of the outlier, they then eliminate the cause. So over time, they start to recognize what the things are that are causing the non-conforming items. Now, backing up for a second, what Deming says is that before you introduce this process, you might see something like this. You might see a pattern where it's getting worse over time. You know, so it goes, instead of on the line, it's going up like this. And that kind of pattern, he called due to special causes of variation, that there are problems that precede any quality system that have to be eliminated before you adopt the quality system. And these special causes of variation could be things like a hostile corporate culture. It could be that you're buying you're buying your product inputs using the least cost method, and so you have different suppliers, and each one has slightly different fabrics. And so the quality of the fabric differs depending on which supplier's fabric you're using. And so the outputs change randomly based on these uncontrolled fabrics. So the solution is that, first of all, you have to create a stable organizational culture. Second of all, you have to create stable HR systems as well. And third of all, you need to hire one supplier for each type of input. So Deming kind of throws out a lot of thinking of management. First of all, he says that get rid of incentives, individual incentives. So he contradicts my point. He says incentives don't work because it creates too much volatility. People compete for the incentive, they do things, they manipulate each other, they get into fights and things like that. Second of all, have a stable HR system so that people can be sure that they know what's going to happen to them, and therefore they'll focus on the task and not be distracted. Third of all, use one supplier, dedicate a supplier for each part, if you will. So you don't use multiple suppliers for the door of the car. Okay, I just got a message that my internet connection is unstable. So I think at this point I can take attendance. We're not done with class yet, so don't go, but I'll take attendance and I'll take attendance just in case the internet dies. Um, darn. Um, Finding it. Oh, wait, here it is. Is this it? Okay, got it. All right, Syed Abbas.
Here.
Hello, Syed. Syed Ahmad.
Here, Professor.
Hello. Samima Akhtar. Alessandro Leschi.
Good morning.
Good morning. David Batesh. Annam.
Here, Professor.
Annam. Melissa Calixto.
Good morning.
Morning. Winston Chan.
Here, Professor.
Hello. Bin Chen.
Here.
Hello. Kai Chen.
Here.
Hello. Jirui Deng. Farhan.
Here, Professor.
Hello. Brianna Faustin. Brianna. Okay. Steve Feng.
Here.
Hello. Jonathan Gonzalez.
Here.
Hello. June. June
Here.
Grant. June.
Here.
Okay. All right. Okay. Jonathan Gonzalez, Jim Grant, Ming Hao Hu.
Here.
Hello. Angelica. Jian Lin. Jian. Leon Liu.
Here, Professor. Good morning.
Hello. Elizabeth.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning, Elizabeth. Rochelle Mendez.
Here.
Hello. Demi Mullings.
I'm here.
Hello. Cameron Nahar.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Aquino Olivier. Nicholas.
Here.
Hello. Jenny.
Here.
Hello, Jenny. Chenille.
Here.
Anna. Siddiqui. Anna.
Good morning, Professor.
Hello. Mwinjin. Mwinjin. Jaron Walls. Yiwen Wu. Kristen Yip.
Hi. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Kristen. And Anita Zhao.
Here.
Hello. Just to get the people that didn't answer, Samima Akhtar, David Batesh, Jirui Deng, Brianna Faustin.
I'm here.
Oh, Brianna's here, okay. Angelica Laborde, Jian Lin, Aquino Olivier, Winjin Turabov, Winjin, Jaron Walls, Yiwen Wu. Okay, all right. All right, that's done. Okay, we still have a couple more minutes. Let me get started on HR. Oh, by the way, your discussion board, your final discussion board is due tonight. You know, maybe you want to think about how organizational change ideas that I was just talking about relate to 12 o'clock high. I think part of the reason I waited till now is that a lot of the stuff in this chapter and many other chapters are relevant to 12 o'clock high. You know, it's really a movie about organizational change, organizational culture. It has to do with HR. It has to do with personality. It has to do with leadership. A lot of the things we talked about during the semester. So it's a good wrap up thing. I'm going to give out, and that's due, the discussion board is due tonight. I'm going to give you your exam next Monday. So you should be reading the textbook. You should have all semester. Please do read the textbook, study, and learn the material. It's a little bit theoretical, but a lot of it is good to know. And I will give you the exam will be based on the textbook. I'll do a little review. People might want that. All right, so I have a few minutes extra. Are there any questions at this point about anything? We're kind of
Is
reaching
the
the end of the line.
is
Yes.
the exam on Blackboard?
Yes, I will post it in the course documents section, and I'll put
Okay,
it in the heading of current exam. So all you have to do is download it, answer the questions. Please work on your own and base it on the textbook. It's totally based,
and
almost totally based on the textbook. So, you know, it gets you to look at the textbook. And all you have to do is re-upload the cover page, the first page. You know, if you want to re-upload the whole exam, it doesn't really matter. But I need the cover page with the answers. And that'll be it.
when's the review session?
What?
When's the review session?
I'll do some review on Monday, okay?
Okay.
Okay, you're gonna open it Monday. When is it due?
So it's due, I think I said 10 days or 9 days, I think. So I think it's due the 17th, I believe. I'll have to double check that, but I believe it's the 17th.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, so we still have a few minutes. Let me just briefly mention HR, then I'll let you go. Who knows what HR is? Who can tell me what HR is? Human resource management. Nobody? How about Alessandro? Can you tell me? Stone silence. How about Leon? Can you tell me what HR is?
Yeah,
Leon?
for what I know, I think HR is it's the part where it involves the communication between management and the consumers, I believe.
Consumers, you mean people that buy the products?
Yeah.
No. That's not accurate. No. HR, human resource
Professor,
management.
isn't it? Like recruitment, benefits,
Yeah,
training,
okay.
development,
That's
and like
correct. In other
relationships.
words, the relationships with the employees, not with the customers. The relationships with the customers is marketing. All right, so that's a huge field in itself. In some ways related to HR. I mean, the fields are siloed, but really the similar concerns may come to play, but there are a lot of differences because usually customers come to a product for different reasons that employees come to a customer. So in other words, both have to be motivated, but they're motivated in different ways. And marketing has generally, there are exceptions, such as the dread of trusts and monopolies. But overall, people depend more heavily on their jobs than on whether they buy this or that product. There are exceptions, but basically the exceptions are rare. So HR has to do with workplace conflict, not minimizing, but coping with workplace conflict. And it has to do with motivating employees, and it has to do with retaining employees, attracting good employees to the company. So it has a lot to do with how the company interacts with its employees. And this has a very, very long and serious history that goes back about 100 well, it depends how you look at it, but maybe 200 years. The earliest labor relations, as we know it, may have been in the 1500s in England. In most of the world, you did not have these kinds of problems because you didn't have free enterprise. You had a little bit of free enterprise, but it wasn't universal. There was certainly commercial relations and trade and small manufacturing and things like that, but you didn't have these large firms making large quantities of goods. And we'll talk more about it next time. But if you go back before 1850, virtually, 3/4 of the population. If you go before 1800, more like 90% of the population was engaged in farming, and they didn't really have employees or anything. Okay, so that's it for today. I'll see you next time on Monday, and we'll give out the exam. And don't forget your final discussion board, and have a nice weekend, and I'll see you on Monday. Take care. If you have any questions, feel free to stick around and we can discuss them.
Professor,
Yes.
I missed the attendance call. I stepped away for a few minutes.
Okay. All right. I'll take care of it.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Okay, I guess no one's got any questions, so